Good evening. I am Mariana Castro Aspiros, a second-year MFA candidate in the Creative Writing and Environment program of the English department here at Iowa State, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. We would like to begin this event with a land acknowledgement. Iowa State University is located on the ancestral lands and territory of the Bajoti, or Iowa Nation. The United States obtained the land from the Meskwaki and the Sauk Nations in the Treaty of 1842. We wish to recognize our obligations to this land and to the people who took care of it, as well as to the 17,000 Native people who lived in Iowa today. We would like to thank the co-sponsors for tonight's talk, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Committee on Lectures funded by student government. A few housekeeping items. There will be an opportunity to ask Dr. Shenk questions. Please note that there are microphones set up in front of the room on the outer sides of the seating for you to use. Please do not use a flash if you're taking pictures. If you leave before the Q&A is finished, please exit quietly and refrain from talking until you have left the room. A lectures program student worker will be foyer to scan your student IDs if you're here for extra credit. Card scanning will not start until the lecture is finished. All are welcome to stay for an open reception in the back of the room with refreshments as soon as the lecture has finished. Finally, I'd like to briefly announce an upcoming event. This Thursday, November 7th, current Iowa State graduate students will compete against each other in the 9th annual 3-minute thesis final competition. This event will begin at 6 p.m. in the South Ballroom of the Memorial Union. All lectures events are free and open to the public. A full schedule is available on the lecture program website. And now, here is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Dr. Benjamin Withers.
So good evening, everyone. Thanks for braving the weather today. Yes, and thank you for joining us in this fall 2024 College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Dean Lecture. Indeed, I am Ben Withers. I'm Dean of the College. So this evening, I am told, is the 37th in this lecture series. This highlights faculty excellence and achievement in teaching, research, and outreach in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. We invite exceptional members of the LAS faculty to present lectures from their own diverse areas of scholarly expertise. They are faculty members who help solve global challenges, who connect the world with art and culture, and who push the boundaries of educational and intellectual dialogue. The topics in the lecture series have ranged from explorations of the barriers people face when seeking mental health treatment to what oxygen-free lakes can teach us, and also new approaches to cancer treatment. So before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to acknowledge the ISU Lectures Program for their role in helping us sponsor and coordinate this event. So please join me in thanking them. I would also like to thank everyone from LAS who was involved in making tonight's lecture possible. Let's thank them as well. It's exciting to be on a campus where there are these valuable partnerships which heighten our ability to share the college's contributions to the community. These kinds of events are greatly appreciated. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Linda Shenk, or as I see on her slide, Linda Shakespeare, professor in the Department of English. In her research, Linda applies methods from her training in Shakespeare and performance studies to foster collaborative storytelling among researchers and community members that supports climate action and resilience. In particular, she works with women farmland owners in Iowa, some of the most potentially powerful but often unheard land stewards in the Midwest. Shenk's lecture bridges the humanities and sciences to explore how practices from Shakespeare and his theater support climate research that fosters collaborative community action. LAS research truly does transform the world by addressing the challenging issues of our time, and Professor Shenk is no exception. Her research has been supported, among many others, by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration's Climate Adaptations Project. That's a mouthful there, isn't it? For the Central Midwest. So please join me in welcoming the Fall 2024 LAS Dean's Distinguished Lecturer, Professor Linda Shenk.
Thank you, Dean Withers. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for coming out on this very significant and intense evening to spend this time together. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you, too, for those folks who are joining virtually. It's really lovely. Many of my community partners, some of those women landowners, are joining virtually. So, in the world of communities and climate work, I entered the scene over here in this part of the image, as one of an entire ecology of researchers and community collaborators, particularly, as you know, women who own farmland in Iowa, as well as urban community groups, some of them right here, who are doing something and are interested in fostering more weather-ready and climate-wise communities. I am a Shakespeare professor, influenced by a dynamic high school teacher who believed that Shakespeare's plays were not just texts to be read, but rather plays that even just average English class students could bring to life and perform. And then I had a college professor who went on to found the American Shakespeare Center, which is now world-renowned. It's in Stanton, Virginia. And as I worked with him in class and in the early productions that went on to form the American Shakespeare Center, he emphasized that the performance conditions of Shakespeare's theater were far more collaborative than I ever knew. There was no director in Shakespeare's company, no central figure who led the collaboration. In fact, the actors didn't even get a central full copy of the script, only their lines with simple cues. Therefore, literally, each actor brought a piece of the play's story, and then the group put the production together as a team. Scholars now call Shakespeare's theater a cognitive ecology, and more on that soon. From this background, I now apply my training in Shakespeare and his collaborative theater to, as Dean Withers mentioned, create strategies that foster collaborative storytelling among researchers and community members to support partnership, action, and resilience. And to introduce the rest of this full scene of which my research creates collaboration, I now want to share with you, taking a deep breath here, my own adaptation of the speech of Shakespeare's chorus figure who opens the play Henry V. And the chorus figure is the character, well, actually Henry V is that famous king who said, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers." So that's Henry V. It begins, however, with a chorus. And that chorus opens the play and asks the audience to use their imaginations to create a far larger and sweeping scene than the small group of actors and the simple bare stage can aptly recreate. So now I ask you to, on your imaginary forces, work. Can this PowerPoint hold the vasty fields of Iowa? Or may I bring within this wooden hall the very stewards who tend the land, research its health? Oh, pardon, since I, a single figure, may attest in little place hundreds. And let me, representative of these great acts, on your imaginary forces work. Think that when I talk of community experts, that you see them. Women caring for the land through relationships, youth and neighborhood groups planting gardens and native plants. Think when I talk of researchers, that you see them. Climate scientists, hydrologists, agronomists, engineers, cultural anthropologists, learning with communities. Follow me as I turn the feats of many minds into one presentation, for the which supply admit me, Linda, to this cognitive ecology. That was a little intimidating to write that, but here we are. So where we're headed together tonight, I'm going to share some strategies from Shakespeare's plays and theater that support the collaboration of a cognitive ecology. I'll share some of what those strategies look like in practice, and then give some examples along the way of collaborative action. And as I promised in the description of the lecture, that I will share the way some of these techniques can enable all of us, from campus to community members, to be better collaborators who learn with and from each other. Shakespeare is usually thought of like this: the singular sage on the stage, often too holding that skull of Yorick in that Hamlet-like position. Let's not forget that actually that skull of Yorick doesn't come for another act of the To Be or Not People, whatever. We usually get this image of him as that singular sage on the stage. But actually, Shakespeare's theater was a lot more like this. A lot more like the company of actors that you see sitting around this table, all as equals. This is from that American Shakespeare Center that my college professor started. And so for part of the year, part of their season, they do the old-time approach, that collaborative approach to theater. There's no director. They put it on together. The actors only get cue scripts. In fact, I kept the closed captioning when they're like, we don't even get a full script. And they only have 2 weeks to put on the production. That is the situation that Shakespeare's company was in. So Shakespeare's theater is an example of what scholars now call a cognitive ecology. It's different experts working together to create a larger action, often using tools to help coordinate that collaboration. In Shakespeare's theater, there was a very simple schematic that they would tack up backstage. It was called a plot. And it provided simple like entrances and things, but a very simple tool. Now, this type of collaboration across different ways of knowing, different experiences, different disciplines, turns out to be central to how we create a more sustainable future. The current paradigm in climate work now is that we co-produce knowledge with communities. No longer the researchers wheeling out the data on the loading dock, there you go, hope it's useful. But instead, working together in a transdisciplinary, really learning from each other kind of way. And so we have, I'm going to use this little try, here we go. Oh, nope. No, I'm too far. Over here we have our different disciplines. We have the humanities, thank you. We have engineering, we have the sciences, all working together in an interdisciplinary way, learning from each other, so they begin to have like ways of thinking that sort of begin to kind of come together as they influence each other, and then they come into the middle to work with community partners, practitioners, those who are actually kind of working on the ground. And in doing that, coming together, really working across these different ways of knowing, the researchers can be really asking from the very beginning, what things matter to you? What kind of metrics mean success to you? What do you need? So that we avoid having, again, that loading dock, wasted knowledge. There's this beautiful work, which it really is. But maybe it isn't quite put in the same position or the same framework that the communities actually needed. So there's often a lot of wasted knowledge. So when we collaborate campus to community, we create more actionable, relevant knowledge for climate work. But sometimes, researchers and communities don't always speak the same language. And so for that, researchers are turning to storytelling as an important way to engage, to work to speak the language of communities, to help the research findings be more relevant, more connected to our own experience, more familiar, more personal. And with those goals, science usually asks themselves, how can we tell a better story? Be better storytellers. And that's important. But as we have here, I'm liking getting up here, this is kind of fun. Up here, we still, though, in that, it's like, here's the story. Isn't it beautiful? And clearly, oh, yes. But this is still perpetuating the model of the old professor, the researcher as the sage on the stage, kind of like I'm doing right now, as the sage on the stage. It's essentially still storytelling too. And that is important. And when we do that storytelling too, we work so hard. And trust me, I teach science communication. Some of those students are here. You guys are awesome. To create this really beautiful story that's perfect, that we've polished, and there it is. But sometimes that doesn't actually give. This is from one of our Iowa State undergraduate researchers. You'll see her cartoons, Danielle Robinson, come through. It's like, here it is. And it's like, oh, I don't really know what to do with that. That's nice. So what I'm interested in and working with Shakespeare and bringing my background is how can we do storytelling with each other? How can researchers and community members tell stories together? Behold collaborative storytelling. Enter Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote beautiful, powerful, and my Shakespeare students know often disturbing plays. But Shakespeare, as all good storytellers, did something that we don't often always think about. He left gaps in his plays. He left things not specified, not clear, undecided. And into those spaces, we as readers, as listeners, as production teams, fill in those gaps with our imagination, with our experience. And this, again, is true of all storytellers, not just Shakespeare, but Shakespeare's a good example. So Shakespeare reminds us to mind the gaps. I thought that would just be a different way of bringing it in. To mind the gaps. And so I'll give you one of the most famous examples that most of you probably have encountered. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare never tells us why those two families are feuding. Never. And because of that, every reader, every production team places that context of what's currently polarizing the community, places it within that context. Here's where I bring in my family, like West Side Story. So we have things like West Side Story. If you've seen Buzz Luhrmann's 1996 Romeo plus Juliet, you'll see that, again, it's actually set within what's currently polarizing a community, often connected in those examples with racial and ethnic tensions. But I think we can apply that sense of polarizing context to our own moment. What's happening politically, what's happening, all kinds of different things with climate change. It's kind of all over. But what's really lovely about these gaps is that how we fill those spaces with our own experiences, our own needs and questions, that then the story becomes ours too. We own the story too. So I've been taught, and I'm going to give you an example, and then more examples are coming. But I just want to give you one more example of another gap that Shakespeare leaves because of his cognitive ecology, that he's working with diverse fellow experts, are his sparse stage directions. Enter Hamlet. That's it. before the to be or not to be scene. That's all. If some of you have read like Tennessee Williams, there are some theater folks in here, like he'll be like, Alma comes in with a pale yellow sweater and she turns looking wistfully and you get all of this detail. And Shakespeare's like, enter Hamlet. And because of that, every production will do something different with Hamlet. They will go through and is it going to be the classic, there he is at downstage wearing tights or something? Is he going to be in like David Tennant, like a skeleton bones shirt? It's a great production. Totally recommend it. Is he going to be, well, actually, no, I'm going to hold that example. But every single time it's different. So then we have this, right? He doesn't tell us what to do. Every production's different. And then, just to top it off, there's more gaps in this one because, frankly, Hamlet is not alone. Polonius and Claudius are listening. And we see that, I hear him coming. Let's withdraw, my lord. Whew. So then we can get Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, which is, I know that you, Claudius, are listening. And I'm performing this to be or not to be for you. So cool. We have all of these choices just because Shakespeare doesn't micromanage us. He gives space for us to come in with our creativity and to create the story. So that's one of the ways I learned storytelling from Shakespeare, is how to leave space for others to enter the story and own it too. And I'm about to give you the example of where this all started for me, how the Shakespeare professor came to recognize this. But I want to just mention, before I go into that it's particularly important for us to leave space for others to enter the story when we're dealing with divisive issues like climate change. We often get the folks, do you believe in climate change? That's like the number one question. And often that notion of human-caused climate change is important, often because people want others to feel a sense of responsibility to take action. But maybe action is really the story. And so we focus on that. I work with people all the time who don't necessarily believe in climate change, or their tenants don't believe in climate change. But it doesn't matter. If we create space in the story, then we all find a place and we own it. So this is where it started. Iowa State did a presidential initiative that allowed some researchers to come together. And one of the folks in the VPR's office said, we should get the humanities on the ground floor of big science. Linda, get us together. Okay. And so I joined a team. I had no idea what I was doing, frankly. But I knew storytelling would be a part of it. So I began to work in Des Moines with a group of middle schoolers, working to empower them to be community leaders around sustainability. And there was one of the most kind of typical storytelling devices for scientists are computer simulation models. They let scientists play around with different stories, essentially different narratives, play with different outcomes. So I worked with this one group, and I asked my colleague who made one, I was like, that is really great. May I bring that in with the youth? And so I brought it in. They did some things with it. They did some really cool, like, systems thinking. It was awesome. But I thought, I want to do more storytelling next time. So I brought it into a later version of the group, and I let them play with it, but I had them tell more of their own stories while they played with this very simple model. And the students then were like, so I said, well, community growers, what does this get you thinking about? And they're like, well, Miss Linda, this gets us thinking that what's special about us as leaders is we lead as a team. Yeah, we lead together. Yeah, we lead with our community. And on the outside, I was like, that's great. Tell me more. On the inside, I was panicked. That wasn't in the model at all. Collective leadership. I was like, what are they doing? And then I realized that this simple model, with them telling some of their stories, left space for them to insert what they needed. And what they needed as a group of middle schoolers who were frankly seen as problems and had never led a thing in their lives, that what they needed to feel was each other with them. So they went on to do some action projects like some community gardening. Beautiful work. I took the model in again with another later group, had them do even more storytelling. And this time they picked, after they did the model, they picked their action project, because I'm always about storytelling with action. They picked their action project. They picked what community partner they wanted to work with. And then they informed me, Miss Linda, when we work with our community partners, we're experts too. Because we know our community. We know what works. They went on to do so much work that the mayor of Des Moines, Mayor County back then, they presented to the city council of Des Moines. The mayor himself came to several of their community events that they did. They did also an event on food security, all with their storytelling. And then they were actually invited to a climate change special screening of that film, Paris to Pittsburgh. He invited them as his special guests. So it was their story. I wouldn't have known what they needed in their story, but they did. And I needed to do the storytelling and then, just like Shakespeare, leave space for their creativity to own it too. So now I take that work and I apply it with working with women landowners in Iowa. I've worked with community groups, some of them are right here, bringing together the sense of storytelling together. I bring some of the stories from research. I bring sometimes the researchers who bring those pieces of the research. And then we start to kind of tell the stories together as we're in this cognitive ecology. And then what's particularly important about women landowners, and that was already just mentioned a little earlier, is the fact that women landowners own or co-own nearly half of the land in Iowa. And yet, their voices are not often heard, just like the youth. And so I'm particularly interested in storytelling with individuals whose voices have not been heard. And I should emphasize that the women landowners, actually a lot like the community group that I worked with here, they are so good at relationship building. That's at their center. They have a great deal to teach us. So now I want to talk about a couple things, some tools that I use that leave space for collaborative storytelling. And that is a quick example of that plot that I told you. So here's one that I do with it's called the maps. Maps are one of the most straightforward tools for bringing community member stories and our stories together. So here we're using the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework, the ACPF, which was created here at Iowa State. Also work with the Daily Erosion Project. We bring in some of these historical maps. Over on the left, we have the 1950 and on 2021 on the right. We have them first. The women themselves tell the stories of their land. What do they remember? What are some of their memories? What kinds of things are important to them? They share their story first. And then we begin, as we hear their values and what kind of stories and things that they're interested in, then we begin to move into the stories of research. Thinking about the topography of the land, thinking about soil type, thinking about also climate projections and what we're seeing in terms of the weather. And then we come along and you'll see these little green lines through here. And then again with the research, we can begin to tell them, here are some really good places to put things like prairie strips, which are those strips of prairie that we put in corn and soybean fields to help. They provide habitat, they slow down the erosion. But they tell their stories first. We bring in our stories, and then we story tell together over a very simple tool, a map. And it creates action. These women go on to, when we always give them project funding, they've gone on to put in prairie strips, to try cover crops for the first time, to put in perennial or native plants, to do pollinator and habitat, and some have gone on to do beekeeping. So now I want to share another tool with you that I have created. I'm the Shakespeare professor who has coded a model. And it's just this one, right? So I know it's not that amazing, but it actually is. It's a very simple, deceptively simple tool, but it has narrative gaps that allow community members and researchers to explore a range of key items that are important for community resilience. It pointedly leaves space And what that does is community resilience, as we've learned, isn't just about what we put in the land, but it's also about our relationships, our social capital. And so it really thinks about what are those aspects, those social and environmental aspects of our stories, and how can we work together? So here it goes. Oh, it's so cute. It is so simple, I know, but that's the beauty of it. It has rain that comes down. It comes down the hill. I mean, now you'd be like, yeah, I see you did that, honey. I get it. I was so excited. I got a bit of code one time. I'm like texting my significant other. I'm like, I got the bit of code I've been looking for. And he's like, have you become a computer nerd? I'm like, yes. So we have rain that's coming down. It's coming over on a hard surface. We see it get bigger as it comes down. We have these that are conservation projects that slow the water and filter it. We also have the way the different people are moving here in terms of their readiness. Are they ready to take action? Are they not ready yet? We also have then folks who in yellow who are ready to take action. And then we also, so it's looping for you right now. This seems so simple. But what we do is we work with women, and it gives them all kinds, and community groups, and it gives them different ways to enter the story of resilience. And we don't use the words climate change at all. I'm going to let it run just a little longer so you can see it, but I'm just going to explain. So up in the top, we have the characteristics that help us think about those different conditions for climate change. Thinking about the weather conditions, how much precipitation in terms of extremes is it coming or not? Also, what are our land conditions? And then thinking about, too, our own readiness and our collaboration. So what this does is that women play, or community groups play with this, and they come up with different stories that matter to them. And then we listen as researchers, and we bring in the stories that are relevant, the data that matters to them. Is it soil health? Is it social capital and those relationships? What is it that is your story? So using this very simple map, I'll use the example too. The community group that I worked with, they got into small groups, they played around with different things, and they began to realize as they talked about readiness, some said, well, we're ready to do things, but a lot of us are retired now, and we can do quite a bit, and they actually are amazing. But it really would be nice if we had some young, fresh, younger folks. Had an international student there that night, and he's like, I have all these friends of mine who have land, but they don't have they can't steward it because they don't have land. And so they came together, and they then over time began to work together. They got some project funding. They did some planting together. They went on to do things like eat together and make food for each other and do yoga together. It was beautiful. And it was all this way of kind of coming together, that collaborative work that happened. I'll just tell one. I have two more stories. Another one is one of the women that I worked with, her husband wanted to join, and she noticed as we worked with this model, I've just given a couple descriptions, that up at the top, you can see all these flowers. So as she and her husband we were playing around doing some storytelling with the model, they began to think, they first of all thought this very simple space as their farm. And then as they kind of worked on it and played around with some more scenarios, they're like, wait a minute, where does the water come from when it gets to our farm? So with that research narratives, I have the watershed map. And we look at that, and we look at some other aspects, and they realized we and the folks around us are at the top of the watershed. What we do matters downstream. If we do things, then that helps everyone else. They never thought of it before. And so the gap of that non-specificity, that simple little green thing that looks like a child did it, which almost, became a place where they then could imagine it first as their farm, and then imagine it as the watershed. And when they did that, they're like, well, because this woman was amazing at getting people together. And so she says, I'd like to have a watershed ice cream social. Would that be okay? So they're now this year in their 4th annual, now they do it all on their own, ice cream social. They get people together at the top of the watershed. They talk about some conservation things. They talk about organic gardening. It's really beautiful. So it's all these ways, just if we leave space in our stories. I've had other women working with it, also realizing the power of outreach and the power of watersheds, go on to do outreach events that connect water quality to land use. I now have women also doing cover crops sometimes for the first time, native plants with family and neighbors. One woman who, again, it was like, I want to do some native plants, and I want to involve my family in it too. And so now that was a family thing that they did together, always strengthening across these different ways. There are so many ways of creating sustainable, resilient future. Our paths are many. The story is vast. And so what I encourage all of us to do is to think about how we can leave space in our stories. We often want to come, actually, I'm going to wait on that one. We often want to come in with our beautiful, perfect story, and we want to share it. And we do that even sometimes too, I think, with our politics. We're like, this is how I'm going to vote, and I've got all these reasons, and I'm going to now present it to this person, and they're going to be convinced. What if we just left space in our stories? Leave space for other people to enter the story. And I will say, I find it to be terrifying because I never know what's happening. I specifically did not get into improv theater for a reason. It's scary. So you don't know where the story's going to go, but oh my goodness, when someone comes in with their creativity and what they do is amazing. I never would have thought of some of these things that these women have done. And through listening to their stories and bringing the stories of research in, we suddenly create something together that none of us would have thought. And I don't know how many times I've heard, I could do that? So I have women restoring savannas, bringing in students from Iowa State to help and learn. I have women doing beekeeping and native plants with their neighbors for the first time, bringing a little 5-year-old into learning how to steward the land and how to keep bees. The stories go on, and it's just this way, again, if we can work across these different worlds. So the last thing I just want to end with is one of the things that we're learning is that storytelling places care rather than information at the center of collaboration. And that language of care is really powerful. And so this actually is the graphical abstract from our upcoming article, in which we share these principles of care. But one of the things that we've learned with care is that that's a place where all of us can come together. A lot of us do research because we care. A lot of the folks, even if they believe in climate change or don't, they care about the land. And it's beautiful what we all do when we leave space for each other. So sharing the story space helps develop that cognitive ecology. Even at times when we initially are beginning storytelling in places that we don't think we would agree. So my final thoughts, and then the time that with questions that I get to learn from you. I want to emphasize that telling a good story is important, but letting others in and do storytelling alongside each other is even more powerful when it's possible. And that's frankly what we do in the literature classrooms, is we're looking at these places of gaps and we're wrestling through those kinds of things. And we allow for multiple stories to be possible. And that is something that we're not just sitting around talking about stories, we're sitting around really looking at how there's these multiple stories that can be brought out. And how do we enter in those stories? And those are techniques that I find to be very powerful in working with communities. And my last point is that I love the fact that my high school English teacher let us English class students perform it ourselves. We didn't just watch movies, which are cool. but he let us get up and embody those plays. And that's one thing too, that when we do the storytelling, just like in the humanities, like in our literature classrooms, part of the whole thing is that we're talking, that we're embodying that space. And my Shakespeare students literally like 2 weeks ago put on in 30 minutes the most complicated scene in Twelfth Night. 30 minutes. I was like, you are amazing. So it's just beautiful. And the fact is it something that was production worthy? Actually, y'all were pretty good. But the main thing is that we do it, right? That we do it together. It's that sense of embodiment. So I just want to say I've learned a great deal from the communities. And I've learned that by letting them into the story, I have learned more things than I ever could have learned just as my own little researcher in my own little silo. So I thank you all, and I look forward to your questions as we now move to that time. So thank you.
I'd love to.
Great. So looking at this bright and beautiful crowd, I'm sure that there are plenty of questions. Let's once again thank Linda for this wonderful talk. And I encourage you to come forward on either side of the room to the microphones, and let's see what you have to ask.
So awkward, I know. It's really okay. Doesn't have to be brilliant.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm wondering, how do you identify what communities you want to engage with? Do you come in with some problem or some idea of what you want to research, and then you try to find a community that might be relevant to? Or do you just make an open call to wherever you're located and try to find something that you think you'd be interested in researching? How do you connect to the people?
That's lovely. For me, actually, I'm particularly interested in going into places where there are communities that their voices have not been heard. And so when I worked in Des Moines with the youth, literally talking to the communities, and what was important to them was their youth. So I was like, well, I talked to Boys and Girls Club, and they let me do a program for youth to empower them. Because that's one of the most important things, is rather than kind of hearing from all the usual suspects, I want to go into those places. And so what I do is I have then community partners that then I find and I say, how can I come in to support something that you're doing already? One of my collaborators who's listening right now, her name is Jean Eels, and also the women in the Women Food and Ag Network. They already work with those women, and they'd love to have more programming that helps support those women learning from each other. So it's really listening to where are those voices that haven't been heard enough, and then going to those folks who are working with them and saying, I'm here and I'm listening. I'm not just going to come in, and I don't tend to do surveys or any of that. I come in, I want to do storytelling, I want to hear their stories, and then I want to provide some project funding so they can actually take action that's relevant to them. So that's kind of how I do it, is I listen first.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Bob, and I live in the Crawford School condominium on Stanton Avenue. It's just a few blocks from here. And Linda helped us organize, back when we first moved in, there were 30 families. Basically, we didn't know each other. We all had different reasons, different motives for moving into this home, this set of homes. But it was amazing that Linda got us together and helped us organize some committees that now still help keep the environment of our condominium looking quite beautiful. And as a result of these meetings, we planted scores of native plants. helped by the city of Ames and some of their programs. We planted dozens of trees, even though when you go into a new condominium, typically the landscaping is supposedly done, but we ferreted out through conversation additional things that needed to be done. I have two questions for Linda. One, how did you find out about us? That's the first question. Secondly, what do we do now?
Oh, Bob, let's get together. This will be great. You all are fabulous. I'm sorry, I'm totally invading your space. You all are fabulous, and let's get together. That would be fantastic, and let's do something else together, because you all are amazing, and the things that I've learned from you as you kind of come together and have learned from each other and are just, you've organized committees and all of these things of those relationship type things of the storytelling you all are doing. So there's that, and I found out about you again through just like the question before was, I went to the city of Ames, and I went to Liz, and I talked to her about some of the water quality and the planting and the rain gardens things, and I said, I'm here to help. What can I do? I'm interested in storytelling. I've got some project funding, and I want to storytelling with, not storytelling at. And so that's how, was through Liz Calhoun at the city of Ames. And sign me up, Bob. I will be on my way. I'd love to work with you all. You're very welcome. Sharon.
Sharon.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Thank you for your lecture tonight, very insightful. Could you elaborate a little bit on storytelling by landowners, if it's more family farming operations or more absentee landowners, and who's farming their land?
So that is really interesting, and I should emphasize Sharon is one of those that I have learned a great deal from. Sharon is amazing, and so she has done incredible work really working with some of those landowners. So just Sharon, you are one of those experts, so thank you. One of the things that is particularly important about women landowners, and so there's a couple different pieces, is that women landowners are often described as like absentee landowners who don't care, they just want the rent check kind of thing, and they're usually left out of decision making. And so I work with them, and I work first with telling the story of like how they came to their land, what also they care about in terms of land in general, what spaces matter to them, and get them telling that story. Because a lot of them have never thought that they have any right to a say on their land. And they do, they own it. And so it's been really listening to, and sometimes then they realize that they actually have conservation in their history all the way back. Like their dad did such and such in their yard at home. They've been doing this all the time, they just never knew it. And so I find that. I also find too with the gender dynamics can be an issue with some of the family farming, because a lot of the women have not necessarily been given a leading role. And so sometimes just letting them, and that's another part of that embodied discussion of having them speak rather than us just talk to them or give them lectures, but really storytell with them as they then begin to talk about what matters to them. They begin to use the language of conservation. And so that really makes a big difference, because a lot of times no one has ever even asked them to be a part of it. And so that is really powerful. Again, it's just storytelling lets everyone have a voice and have authority, and that's what's so lovely. If I come in with the language of information, and I've done that, like, what information do you need? What kind of climate work, kind of climate projections are you interested in? I come in with a language of information, and it perpetuates the same silence that they've been encouraged to kind of stay within. But if I ask them their story, then they begin to move into a place where they have a story. And sometimes it's working with them. So that's some of the things too. As I say, Sharon does incredible work with women landowners. So thank you too, Sharon. Yes.
I have for a long time been looking at news stories, research, and personal stories about people with the environment and the climate. And I just happened to run across this by accident. I'm going to read a couple lines from Oxfam International press release that just came out in October. They say an audit of the World Bank's 2017 to 2023 climate finance portfolio found between 24 billion and 41 billion in climate finance that went unaccounted for from the time the projects were approved and when they closed. A clear public record showing where the money went or how it was used makes any assessment of its impacts impossible. It also remains to be seen whether these funds were even spent on climate-related initiatives, and they say it may even go well beyond 41 billion. I haven't seen any news stories about this. Where's the storytelling on this? And how do you bring it about?
Talk to me a little bit more about where the storytelling is. This is a really interesting question. Fill me in a little bit more.
Well, it just seems like there is no discussion about this topic. I mean, that's a lot of money. And if it's not being used for what it's supposed to be used for, where is it going? And the World Bank is headquartered in Washington, D.C.
I have to admit, I don't know.
And I know the American taxpayers fund an awful lot of the World Bank.
Yep. So I have to admit, I don't know. What I do know is that the kind of work that I help fund through the projects that I work on is work that is useful for supporting the land, both with climate projections, but also right now. Kind of helping with reducing runoff, reducing erosion, fostering soil health, all things that are all small projects. That's another thing that we do is the action projects are small amount of funding. So that way folks can take low risk type things and try something for the first time. So that's actually something that I think is particularly important, is that we also let each other take some risks and also do things that can be really mattering now. So that's really important to me too, that just naturally fosters things like soil health, pollinator habitat, things that we just need right now. Thank you.
So it seems like we need to intertwine this story too, because there's billions of dollars that could be utilized for conservation practices that we know of. Somebody might be just using it for their own personal offshore account somewhere.
I don't know, and I can't speak to that, but what I can speak to is I know that, like the NOAA project that I'm a part of, I'm one of 4 lead PIs, and it's in the Central Midwest. At the center of what we do is community action, that communities come to us. This is what we want to do. These are then the partnerships in terms of some of the research that we want to think about, but these are our needs. We work with tribal communities. That's not been my center of area. And women landowners very specifically, and we give them action projects, and they're putting in weather stations, and they're doing canning work, and they're doing pollinator habitat and prairie strips. So those are things that we're doing, again, to be very much focused on getting the money out to communities. Thank you.
Any final questions? If not, there's a reception following here. Perhaps you feel more comfortable approaching Linda afterward to ask her a personal question. We'd encourage you to do so, but for right now, join me in thanking Linda again for this talk. I also encourage you to keep an eye out for other events that the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences sponsors. You can find that information on our college website. That's las.iastate.edu. Hope to see you again at an event in the future.